I get asked about Bruce Lee all the time, and I can tell you that his sidekick was spectacular.
Picture this. A man weighing barely 135 pounds, generating punches so fast that trained fighters swore they never saw them leave.
I didn't believe Bruce Lee was as good as he is in his films. So he hit me and I fell onto the sofa with millions of people watching it.
His body, and scientists still argue today whether what he did was even physically possible. Before we go any further, stop scrolling for a second, because what you're about to hear about Bruce Lee isn't just another martial arts story. It's a collection of records, eyewitness accounts, and controversial claims that blur the line between human and something beyond human. And the crazy part? The deeper you go, the harder it becomes to explain him using normal science. Let's start with something simple. If I told you a man once hit a speed of over 200 miles per hour in a punch, you'd laugh, right? But that claim is still debated around Bruce Lee today. Now don't jump to conclusions yet, because this is where it gets interesting. Because the people who trained with him, the engineers who analyzed his movement, and even modern fighters who reviewed his footage frame by frame all say the same thing. He didn't move like a normal athlete. And that's where the mystery begins. Let's rewind. Bruce Lee wasn't built like a heavyweight champion. He wasn't even big enough to be considered intimidating in a traditional sense. But when he moved, something strange happened. Opponents didn't react in time. Not because they were slow, but because his motion seemed to begin and end faster than human perception. There's a concept in combat sports called the reaction window. The average human takes about 0.25 seconds to visually process and react to an attack. But some witnesses claim Bruce Lee operated below that threshold, meaning, by the time your brain registered the movement, the strike had already landed. Now here's where things get even more unsettling. In controlled demonstrations, Bruce Lee reportedly performed a 1-inch punch that could knock grown men off their feet. Think about that for a second. No wind-up, no space, just raw force generated from almost zero distance. Biomechanically, that shouldn't produce enough momentum to knock someone back. And yet, people flew. So how? Modern experts break it down like this. It wasn't arm strength. It was structure, timing, and explosive kinetic chain activation, where force travels from the ground, through the legs, hips, torso, and finally into the fist in a fraction of a second. But even that explanation doesn't fully satisfy researchers when they analyze slow-motion footage. Because Bruce Lee wasn't just efficient. He was unusually efficient. Now let's talk about speed. There's a famous claim that Bruce Lee could land multiple punches in the time it takes most people to blink. And while the exact numbers are debated, here's what's not debated. Professional fighters who watched him spar said they couldn't track his hands. One of his training partners famously said, "It felt like you were defending after you were already hit." That statement alone has fueled decades of speculation. But let's pause here, because this is where most people get it wrong. This isn't magic. It's not supernatural power in the literal sense. But it does raise a serious question. How did one man push human movement so far beyond what was considered normal at the time? And the answer might be more disturbing than you think. Because Bruce Lee trained differently. While most martial artists specialize in one style, he rejected traditional limits entirely. He studied boxing, fencing, Wing Chun, wrestling, and then stripped them down to only what worked. No tradition, no rules, only efficiency. He called it using no way as way. And that mindset created something unique, an athlete optimized for pure combat reality instead of form. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Let's talk about his legendary conditioning. Bruce Lee reportedly had body fat levels so low that modern doctors would consider it borderline unsustainable long-term. Yet he maintained extreme energy output, fast switch dominance, and incredible recovery. Some training logs suggest he performed hundreds of push-ups with clapping variations, one-arm training, and explosive strikes daily, while still maintaining sharp reflexes and flexibility that rival elite gymnasts. And this leads to one of the biggest mysteries. How did he avoid burnout? Because when modern athletes push that hard, they break down. But Bruce Lee didn't just survive it. He thrived in it. Now let's get into something even more controversial. There are claims, still debated, that Bruce Lee could read and react to attacks almost before they fully developed. This is sometimes explained through anticipation reading. Elite fighters don't react to the punch. They read the setup before it happens. Shoulder tension, hip shift, eye movement. But observers of Bruce Lee claim something more extreme. They said he reacted at the same time the opponent intended to move, almost like he predicted intention itself. Now, is that scientifically proven? No, but it is a recurring pattern in high-level combat perception studies. Experts appear to slow time, not literally, but neurologically. Their brains process motion more efficiently, creating the illusion of superhuman reaction speed. But Bruce Lee seemed to push even beyond that category. Now let's slow down for a moment and look at something physical. One of the most shocking demonstrations attributed to him is a flicking nunchaku speed display. Witnesses claim the weapon became a blur, visually impossible to track. Modern physics tells us something important here. Human vision has a processing limit. Once movement exceeds a certain speed in close range, the brain fills in gaps. So what people saw may not have been accurate motion, but interpreted motion, and that creates an illusion of something inhuman. But even if we explain illusions, we still have the raw force outputs, and they don't disappear that easily. Now here's the part nobody talks about. Bruce Lee didn't just train his body. He trained his nervous system like a weapon. He practiced micro-movements, reaction drills, unpredictable sparring patterns, forcing his brain to operate under chaos. And this is where modern sports science starts to catch up. Elite fighters today use reaction light systems, AI sparring simulations, and neuromuscular drills that resemble what Bruce Lee was already experimenting with decades ago. So the question becomes, was he ahead of his time? Or did he simply unlock something most humans never reach? Let's go deeper. There's a famous saying from people who sparred with him. You didn't fight Bruce Lee. You survived him. That's not poetic exaggeration. It reflects how overwhelming his pace felt. Opponents weren't trying to win exchanges. They were trying to understand what was happening. And that distinction matters. Because once a fighter controls your perception, they control the fight. Now let's address something that always comes up. Was he actually superhuman? If we define superhuman as breaking the laws of physics, then no. But if we define it as pushing human capability so far beyond the average that it feels impossible, then Bruce Lee sits in a category almost alone. Because even today, with modern training, nutrition, biomechanics, and sports science, very few fighters come close to the combination of speed, precision, explosiveness, and adaptability he displayed. And here's the final twist. The more modern experts analyze him, the less they focus on mystery, and the more they focus on efficiency. Because Bruce Lee wasn't powerful in the traditional sense. He was optimized. Every movement removed waste. Every strike had purpose. Every second of motion was compressed. And when you compress human motion that aggressively, it stops looking like normal movement. It starts looking like something else entirely. So maybe the real question isn't whether Bruce Lee was superhuman. Maybe the real question is, how much of what we call human limits are just untrained potential? And if one man could push that far in such a short life, what's stopping anyone else from getting closer than we think? Because the most unsettling part of his legacy isn't what he did. It's the idea that it might be repeatable. And if that's true, then the mystery of Bruce Lee isn't about the past. It's about what humans are still capable of becoming. And you're probably wondering right now, how far did he really go? Well, that's where the deeper evidence gets even more controversial. But that's a story most people are not ready to hear. Because once you start digging into the stories surrounding Bruce Lee, things stop sounding like normal athletic achievements. They start sounding like urban legends. Except many of them came from trained fighters, actors, stuntmen, and people who had absolutely nothing to gain by exaggerating. And one story in particular still shocks combat experts today. During filming, camera crews reportedly struggled to capture Bruce Lee's movements clearly because standard film cameras at the time couldn't fully track the speed of his strikes. Think about how insane that sounds. Most actors were told to slow down their punches so audiences could see them. Bruce Lee was told to slow down because the camera literally lost details of his motion. Now, sure, some of these stories have been dramatized over the years. But even behind the exaggeration lies a very real truth. His movement speed was abnormal enough that filmmakers constantly had to adjust around him. And that's not mythology. That actually happened. Now here's where the conversation becomes almost unbelievable. Bruce Lee reportedly performed fingertip push-ups using only 2 fingers. Not once. Not for a photo. Repeatedly. Now, before people say, that's fake, understand something important. The human hand is not designed to support explosive bodyweight force through 2 fingers alone, without extraordinary tendon conditioning. Modern grip specialists spend years building tendon density for movements far easier than that. But Bruce Lee trained connective tissue obsessively. Not just muscles. Tendons, ligaments, grip strength, explosive stability. He understood something decades before mainstream sports science caught up. Muscles generate force, but tendons transfer it. And the faster force transfers through the body, the more explosive a fighter becomes. That's one reason his strikes look different. Now let's talk about pain tolerance. Multiple training partners claim Bruce Lee sparred with an intensity that bordered on frightening. Not reckless, controlled, but relentless. And according to some accounts, he absorbed impact that visibly stunned other fighters without emotionally reacting to them. That doesn't necessarily mean he didn't feel pain. It means his nervous system control may have been extraordinary. Modern neuroscience shows elite performers can regulate panic and stress responses under extreme pressure. Bruce Lee may have pushed that ability further than most. And that changes everything in combat. Because once fear disappears, speed increases, decision-making sharpens, hesitation vanishes. Now here's another disturbing detail. Bruce Lee was obsessed with economy of motion. Sounds simple, right? But this idea may be the hidden reason he appeared superhuman. Every unnecessary movement wastes time. Most fighters telegraph attacks without realizing it. Tiny shoulder shifts, weight changes, breathing patterns. Bruce Lee worked obsessively to eliminate those signals. So opponents weren't just reacting slowly. They were reacting to almost nothing. Imagine trying to defend against an attack your brain barely detected. That's why some fighters describe sparring with him as confusing. Not painful, confusing. Now let's go deeper into the famous 1-inch punch. Most people think the secret was raw power. Wrong. The real secret was timing and shockwave transfer. Bruce Lee understood how to create force instantly without visible loading. Modern biomechanics experts explain it like this. Instead of pushing through the target slowly, he generated a sudden acceleration spike, like cracking a whip. That rapid energy transfer destabilized balance before the brain could compensate. And balance disruption is devastating in close combat. So even though the strike traveled only inches, the force arrived explosively. Now here's something almost nobody mentions. Bruce Lee's breathing control. This part sounds small until you realize how important oxygen efficiency is in combat performance. Witnesses said he could go from completely relaxed to explosive motion instantly. No tension buildup. No visible preparation. That level of control is incredibly rare because tension slows speed. Relaxation creates acceleration. That's why elite fighters look loose before impact. But Bruce Lee took it to another level. He moved like electricity stored inside calmness. And honestly, that's what scared people most. Not the punches, the unpredictability. Now let's address the elephant in the room. Could Bruce Lee defeat modern fighters? This debate never ends online. Some argue modern MMA athletes are bigger, stronger, and technically more evolved. And physically, that's true. But others argue Bruce Lee's greatest weapon wasn't technique alone. It was adaptation. He learned faster than almost anyone around him. And that's terrifying. If you thought these stories about Bruce Lee were unbelievable, trust me, this is only scratching the surface. Because the deeper you dive into Bruce Lee's life, training methods, hidden philosophies, and real combat abilities, the crazier it gets. And the most shocking part? Even decades after his death, modern fighters, scientists, and martial artists are still trying to understand how one man pushed human performance so far ahead of his time. So if you want to see more hidden facts, untold stories, and mind-blowing evidence about Bruce Lee and other legendary figures, make sure you subscribe right now. And if you enjoyed this video, check out the other informational videos already available on my channel. You're going to love what's coming next. Because sometimes legends aren't exaggerated enough.